want to say anything to start with, or just go for the questions?
You know what, I do want to say, because
Please do.
I've always thought Western Christianity was mega weird. Because when people are talking about tradition in this thing, they don't have any traditions. I mean, this is not what the ancient church taught. We don't have any of that stuff. There's no predestination, no species of grace, no original sin, original guilt. And hell has never been thought of as a concrete physical place in the ancient church. All this stuff came about after the year 1000, and that's something novel from our point of view. It's something very new. Even the doctrine of atonement, which started all the trouble, didn't exist until after the year 1000. Christ never died to save us from God. I mean, where did they get this idea? This isn't part of the tradition, or it's not taught in Scripture either. You know, Christ redeemed us from the power of death, and therefore from the power of the prince of this world, and made it possible for us to cooperate with God's grace. There's only one God's grace, not this and that, arm twisting grace and sprinkle on you grace and stuff like that. This is all something, this is novel. This is all new stuff that came after the year 1000. None of this existed in the church before that. None of this existed in the ancient church. And the Scripture doesn't teach any of it. Anyway, I just wanted to get that off.
Good stuff. Do we have a leading question, a burning question?
Hell is a burning question, so if you have questions about it, it's burning.
So Kevin, going into this, you know, it's an engaging conversation to have with many people in the world. And I'm guessing there's been much conversation that you have received producing this film. Are you just kind of ready to engage with that? You're going to make this film. You know what comes with the turf is you're going to have personal one-on-ones. How do you prepare for that? How do you stand in that? And where are you going with that?
Switch it over to come to
Yeah, so engaging in conversations
Outside of the movie.
outside of the film. How do I prepare for that? How do I engage?
Like going into the project, did you know this was coming?
Yeah.
And did you make a choice of, okay, I'm ready to get into this? Did you want to back out? And now that you're in it, how does that continue to form for you as a person?
Yeah, I think I got into this, you know, maybe a little naively. I mean, it was just purely something that I found really personally compelling. Actually, by the way, I have to say that I edited a book by Brad Jersak in the fall of 2008 that was really the impetus for me going on this journey. And so I was just so compelled by engaging in this historical discussion that I just felt I wanted to take this to a broader audience. And so, yeah, I guess I would just, you know, I think one of the things that this film is trying to address is how difficult it is to dialogue about controversial theological issues. And I think one of the reasons is that we are fusing our beliefs with our identities. And so I'm not just somebody who holds liberal ideas, I am a liberal. And you're not just somebody who holds conservative ideas, you're a conservative. So therefore, if you're wrong, you're not just wrong, you're kind of damnable. You're not just wrong, hold the wrong views, you're the wrong kind of person. And I think that that's one of the things we're trying to, I think, make ourselves aware of. Because I can tell you so many times during the shooting of this film, how we sat in the van afterwards and went, man, we're a bunch of jerks. Because we had totally judged somebody whose views we really disagreed with, and were humbled by how graceful they treated us. So yeah, I guess that for me, that's a constant reminder to be humble and to hold things loosely.
Anyone else want to jump in on that one, or?
Well, for me, I came into it even more naive, because I didn't edit Brad's book. And I didn't have time to even really think about the whole concept of all these other beliefs. And you know, coming from the Mennonite church and the sphere that we live in, you're taught one thing, and that's what it is. And you know, so for me, this is haven't really arrived with this whole process. I mean, this is only beginning for me after making the film. You know, it's become something that, you know, question mark at the end of the film is pretty important to the title. And, I don't think really, you come to a conclusion really about, where you're gonna settle and where you're gonna sit on this. And you have to really ask yourself, how core is that to, your walk? Are people downable or not? I think not.
I think that Frank Schaeffer, of course, is Orthodox also, the one gentleman. I think one of the things to remember, though, that faith is an orientation of the soul. It isn't coming into an accord with a system of facts.
Yeah.
Faith is an orientation of the soul toward the will of God. It's not coming into accord with a system or collection of supposed facts. And you have religion, but religion is a degradation of faith. It's when faith collapses into an ideology, then you have religion, and you have a system of facts that if you don't believe, you can't possibly have a relationship with Christ.
Wow.
So that's ideology, it's not faith. And it's for religion that we can kill people. We can't kill anybody for faith. We kill people because of religion. Religion is a form of tribalism. I asked one time my first teacher, Father John Romanidis, I asked him, how do we know who's saved and who isn't? Everybody asked the question. And he said, son, he said, we know where grace is, we do not know where it is not. See, that's not our decision. And you don't have this, I don't know what they call water pouring grace and arm twisting grace. The grace of God is the uncreated energy of God that brings us into communion with Him through our created energies. It's all about energy, Apostle Paul mentions it 26 times in the New Testament, but you won't find it once in the English version. And yet Paul mentions it 26 times. Energy, the exchange of energy between man and God. And we have kind of a framework of teachings. But for one thing, the West has too many dogmas. It has far too many doctrines. And Augustine, of course, is the poison in the well. Who poisons the water. But, he's the toxin in the well. Yeah. He's the one that thought marriage was a venial sin cloaked in a guise of respectability for the sake of procreation. So in any case, the thing I want to, like what Frank Schaeffer said a few times, maybe I said once or twice, we don't know a lot of this stuff. And there's no reason why we should know it. And if we were supposed to know it, it would have been revealed to us in very, very clear terms, and it isn't. So it isn't necessary. What's necessary is an orientation of the soul toward the will of God. Correct belief about things, of course, we understand that. And the Orthodox Church is not universalist. We are not universalists. But the thing is that for us, the river of fire that comes down from the feet of Jesus Christ, the Ancient of Days, and the prophet Daniel. St. Basil the Great tells us that both heaven and hell is both, that fire is both heaven and hell. Because it's the love and the glory of God. And the way your conscience encounters it makes it heaven or hell for you. But heaven and hell is the same place. It's your conscience in the face of the love and the light of Christ. Like Abba Ephraim the Syrian says, the sin against love is the greatest sin of all. And nothing burns more deeply than the sin against love. Anyway, I better shut up.
Thank you. One question here.
I have a question about, Kevin. How come it took till 2012 to make this? Because I would think that this would fall into the category of the bleeding obvious in many ways. So, any ideas?
Well, it took that long for me to meet you.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's a great question. I mean, why isn't the bleeding obvious? And, I think there's a lot of historical reasons for that. And to be honest, I think Ron Dark could answer that question perhaps better than I could, in terms of how come it's taken us so long to really ask, these questions, and why do we still persecute people who do? Ron, do you have any thoughts on that?
I think what's happened probably in the last 20 years, there's been a real shake-up in the Reformed Evangelical Sanhedrin. And they've taken for granted for really 500 years certain notions of accepting violence of God, the Old Testament, to the point where Jews are commanded to go and commit genocide. You get this in Deuteronomy, Joshua. They've accepted notions of one view of the atonement, the penal theory, and there's 6 views of the atonement in the Christian tradition, just not one. They've reduced the study of the Bible to the literal, grammatical, historical, missing the mystical, the spiritual, the allegorical. Heaven and hell has become a platform within that Sanhedrin. If you differ, you get excommunicated. You're seen as heterodox. And there's a huge seismic shift happening, and I think that's probably what people sometimes call it the postmodern. They're questioning what developed over the last 500 years in a more intense form. And some of them are going back to the Mother Church tradition, because in the Mother Church tradition you get 6 views of the atonement, you get a certain refusal to accept a literal view of heaven and hell, questioning of the violence of the God of the Old Testament, never accepted that. You read the Old Testament through Jesus, and Jesus allowed violence to come upon him rather than acting violently or vindictively in others. So I think we have pioneers right now in that who are rethinking that whole way of understanding that form of Christianity. And you get many people who grew up in some form of Reformed evangelical Christianity. They've probably sensed that something was not right, and now it's becoming formalized and articulate. In Kevin's film, some of Brad's works, Archbishop Lazar, and there is the gold mine of the historic church, which even in the creed, you know, he came down for us and for our salvation. It doesn't say the view of the atonement. It's a mystery. You leave it a mystery. You don't define things narrowly or simply. And so I think there's a very healthy questioning going on that hopefully will lead people not away from faith, but take their spades to the mother lode of faith, because there's immense riches there. But the other dilemma we face is we have a culture of amnesia. Most people have no sense of history. And so if they're raised with one view, they come to reject it, and they think they're rejecting Christianity, whereas all they're doing is rejecting is a certain form of Reformed evangelical Christianity. And back of all that is a huge cathedral of insight.
I think we've got one here and then one there. Did you want to jump in on
Yeah,
that
I want
one?
to jump in on that. I agree with everything Ron just said, and I also have a supplementary angle on that, I think, and that is the question of why is it that some from the Anabaptists and Vineyard and you know that stream of faith, what's drawn them to look further back in history than the Protestant Reformation, and I honestly believe that there's a revelation element to it, that when we started singing about the Father's love in the mid-'80s, in the late 80s, you begin to start believing what you sing. And you, our minds are very, very, very resistant to change by nature. Our brains just work that way. But when you begin to sing things from your heart, and then you begin to feel those, and you have an experience of the love of God, whether it's just the sublime of singing or whether it's actual revelation, it's like, actually God loves you, you know, and you start to get it. Then questions pop up, very predictable, like dominoes. So it's like, if the Father loves me, then if God is love, then what's this about, like, needing to torture Jesus? What's that about? And so we looked at the cross, that some of these things that the Archbishop was critiquing. It's like, you know, that view of the cross where God has to punish somebody, that was from a 27-year-old angry young man with a legal background in the 1500s. That's a little bit recent to be making it the gospel, right? And then once we work through that, we're like, okay, so if he didn't have to punish his son, like, what's the deal with torturing people for billions and billions of years? If the and it becomes less believable because we've been singing about the Father's love for 30 years. And then from like the torture on the cross to the torture in hell, then you start asking the genocide questions. It's like, what's the deal with Joshua anyway, you know? And so these things are, I think it was a very predictable kind of direction, and instead of just making it up, instead of just like, hey, I know, let's make it about this or that. It's like, we should actually check what the disciples of the disciples taught. And that got people sort of, in my world, reading the fathers and the mothers of the church and going and having coffee with the archbishop and so on, because we're like, we need something more than, well, we don't like that, so we'll just make up our own thing. And there's a real connection now between postmoderns and what Ron called the mother church. So that's one of my...
That's helpful.
Yeah.
I have a question, I think, for Brad and for Ron over here. And I think both of you, and also Frankie Schaefer, had brought up certain church fathers such as Gregory of Nyssa and of course Origen. And I wonder there that, I mean, having looked at both of these figures myself and seeing the bounty of their work and a more universalist approach, isn't it fair to say that in the chorus of the fathers that especially Origen and some of his universalist tendencies was drowned out?
Origin was drowned out, is that essentially?
Yeah, I mean, one of the reactions to Origen, when it said a certain type of universalism, he was asking what I think is a fair question. He's like, could even the devil be forgiven? And he admits, I'm doing experimental theology here. They hadn't even finalized the canon yet. But he goes to Colossians chapter 1, where it says that things visible and invisible that need reconciling will be reconciled by the blood of Jesus. So then he's like, what are the invisible things that would need reconciling by the blood? So he asks this and gets in tons of trouble. It's like, you can't save the devil, you know? And so by the time of Gregory, then he's way more careful. But Gregory, like I said in the movie, is the final editor. His peers were on board with him in this. His sister, Macrina, the teacher, taught him this. His brother was part of it, and they're like, you know what? God may, love may actually win. I mean, they're the original Love Wins people in some ways. And he doesn't get drowned out. That part of his teaching kind of gets forgotten by evangelicals. But it bugs me then when I hear an evangelical saying, well, the Orthodox view is eternal conscious torment. It's like, that's not the Orthodox.
No, it's not the Orthodox.
That's not Orthodox. It's not. Gregory's Orthodox, and he's like pretty hopeful. So that's where I come in.
So how much validity then, from a basic Christian understanding that there is a God, and that God created angelic beings first, and then humans, if we have Jesus quoted as saying that hell was created for the devil and his angels, how much validity do you put in that, and why, when asking this question about hell, why don't we start there with hell's creation and its purpose? If we believe that Jesus was quoted correctly, why don't we ever start there? We always start with us. And Rob Bell in his book, this movie, so I don't know, Kevin, if you have more to say, or Brad, just in regards to even what you're saying about origin, that's all drowned out. No one asked the question, well, Jesus said that hell was created for the devil and his angels. Is that a basic starting point? And why don't we ever really start there? Because then we have the greater questions. Well, if Hitler may be in heaven, why can't, as you said, Satan be saved and in heaven?
Do you want to start?
Yeah, because at the Council of Florence, just before the fall of Constantinople, St. Albemarle of Ephesus represented the Orthodox Church. And the debate that came up, he gave 10 responses against purgatory, idea of purgatory. And he said the very same thing. He says, how can you say that, hell is not created for mankind or humanity? It's created for Satan and his angels. But of course, what is hell except eternal separation from God and being tormented by his love? Because of your hatred of his love. And St. Cyril of Jerusalem, in his catechetical lectures, reminds us that we have no judge except our own conscience. And our conscience comes face to face with the glory and love of God is all that judges us. God punishes no one either in this world or the world to come. And that our own conscience makes the love and glory of God, heaven or hell, to us. There is no fire that's created to torture people in for all eternity. There's nothing like that. That's some kind of neo-paganism. There's nothing like that. It's in our own conscience that it does. And, you know, when people say, oh, well, you can't, your works have nothing to do with being saved, and yet Jesus Christ says, in the resurrection, those whose works are good and those whose works are evil experience his love one way or another. But in the liturgy, which was given to us by Apostle James, that we still serve in the Orthodox Church, which, thank God, St. John Chrysostom made it shorter because there were too many psalms in it. The constant responses are the man-befriending love of God for mankind. Our God who loves mankind, our man-befriending God. That's the only thing. There's nothing in there, any place in this whole liturgical cycle that mentions hell. In the entire liturgy, it's all about the resurrection of Christ. But when we talk about redemption and ransom, part of the problem is that these things are understood in the West through the dialectic of the law court and the rationalism of Aristotle. They're metaphors. To whom did he pay the ransom? To death, of course, because man was all his lifetime held in bondage to the fear of death. So he paid the ransom to the power of death by dying and rising again, so that we're liberated from the fear of death. And who holds us in bondage to the fear of death? But the prince of this world. Consequently, we're redeemed from the prince of this world. Ransom and redemption are both done from somebody who illicitly holds someone in bondage, with no rights to them. So the mystery of redemption is the mystery of the full suffering love of God with mankind. It is not the satisfaction of somebody's justice. The whole mystery of redemption, the whole moral idea behind it, is the co-suffering love of God with mankind, which we could see in our Lord Jesus Christ, who is enthroned in glory on the cross. That's why in most icons we have King of Glory, not King of the Jews.
So you're saying Jesus was misquoted then, saying that hell was created?
No, hell was created for Satan and his angels, but by whom? I mean, by Satan and his angels. It wasn't created for mankind. And he says in the resurrection, you know, he said, come and inherit, come and receive. So nobody's inherited or received it yet before the second coming. It's impossible to be in heaven or hell without the body and the resurrection. Man and soul and body together. We're not Gnostics. You know, Gnostics believed that soul and body were somehow enemies. That somehow the body and the spirit were enemies of each other. That's Gnosticism. It's not Christianity. The soul cannot experience without the body because it's the whole person. And that was quite the universal teaching of the ancient church without any exceptions.
Okay,
Except the Manichaeans.
Angels, eternal beings can be kind of tormented, but humans not necessarily.
Well, eternal beings, of course, they can be tormented. They're already tormented by the love of God. That's why it's created for Satan and his angels. They're already in hell. They are the only ones who are already in hell. They don't have a body to wait for. But if you approach anybody who's a heroin addict, you're going to find out that you can be in hell in this life, and very many people are. And they created that hell themselves, just as Satan created the prison cell.
Okay, the gentleman at the back.
sorry.
That's okay.
Thank you.
One of the unfortunate dilemmas of this film is it exposes so many questions that we continue to talk about in so many different ways. But I want to say, take a second to say thank you to Kevin for being such a thoughtful and beautiful film. So thank you. It's hard to arrive at a lot of these thoughts without a final answer, of course. But if somebody was to say to you, what's the elevator pitch for this movie, so I could explain the essence of what it is instead of my own words, what would you say it is?
The elevator pitch. It's kind of hard to do with your own film, to be honest. What would you say the elevator pitch is?
You can't throw it back.
I'm buying time. I mean, we pitched this film all summer as a movie that really looks at the debate people are having about hell. But I mean, obviously, it's more than just an objective look at the debate. It's more an engagement with really how can we know anything specifically about hell, and how should we approach the beliefs that we hold.
Okay.
Yeah.
One last question. If I stopped reading Rob Bell before I saw this movie, will I still go to heaven?
Ask Rob Bell.
Yes.
Okay, you guys did a really good job of couching it in language of theodicy and God's character, and I want to thank you for that because I think that's the crux of the issue. However, I struggle having deconstructed the eschatological notion of hell. We still exist with the problem of evil and suffering and pain right now. So we've rescued sort of the end time, love of God. perhaps through universalism, but why the hell should we go through hell now? Like my buddy's 45 and dying of cancer. That sucks. It hurts. That problem of theodicy and evil and God's justice still exists, even if we've done a really good job today, this evening, thank you for your film, of rescuing it in the end. What about right now?
Well, I think it's a great question, I mean, because really, you could apply the same defense that Robin Perry does of universalism. It should lead to the elimination of evil. God is all-powerful, God is all-loving.
Yeah, I was thinking that during the flick.
Yeah.
In the end, freedom still has to play a role here, because otherwise we wouldn't be in the situation we find ourselves in today. God would have never allowed us to get to the point where, as Archbishop Lazarus says, we choose hell now.
Yeah, I mean, freedom, again, how do you define the term? I think you're trying to introduce the notion of free will, and I think, something Brad addressed in the film is the question of, do we actually have free will? Or are we, as René Girard would call us, we're not individuals, we're interindividuals, because we're co-determining all the time. And so, but I mean, getting back to the problem of evil, I mean, to be honest, I'm not going to say I have an answer to that at all, and that's something I'm definitely wrestling through, one step at a time. That's a topic that I would like to explore in a subsequent film.
You're going to edit me next year on that.
Awesome, good. I was thinking film, but book, good.
Well, you start with the book.
I don't know what kind of start. I think these two gentlemen are enormously courageous for having undertaken this.
Actually, we ran the risk that you might not like the film.
I was just going to say the answer of theodicy. I'm just teaching a third-year class on Christian tradition this semester, and last few weeks we've scanned the whole Christian tradition on theodicy, from the biblical, post-apostolic, patristic, medieval, right up to people like Jürgen Moltmann. I was a student of Dorothy Soleil for a while, and her grappling with Moltmann on issues like that. So to answer that, you almost have to sit down and listen to the mothers and fathers of the church as they've grappled with a very complex issue without giving a very simple answer, but also not slipping away into vague mystery. And somewhere in between sort of a Sunday school answer and mystery is the grappling both intellectually and then engaging our world where there is suffering, and being agents like Francis of Assisi. We are the body, the hands of Christ, and we're to be there in what Archbishop Mazzaro called co-suffering love. The degree we enter into the suffering of others, we are raised up to a higher level. To the degree we are insensitive or indifferent, we cease to be human in a minimally meaningful sense.
Yeah, evil is a lack of empathy. That's precisely what evil is. It's a total lack of empathy. That's the only definition of evil that one can actually grasp.
First, I want to just echo the thanks and gratitude and congratulations for making such a great picture. Kevin, I'm glad that you escaped with your life from the Westboro Baptist. That you're here with us in the flesh tonight. And, I'm guessing that they weren't amongst the ones that you were referring to about people that surprised you with how gracefully they came.
Different people when the cameras are off, I can tell you that.
Yeah.
What's that?
There are different people with the cameras off.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So that was kind of my question. How did that actually, what was that like? There's kind of a little shift here, going away from the theology to the actual experience of making the thing. But I would love to be proved wrong in that assumption, by some surprise. But
I'm still waiting for it to be revealed that these are a bunch of performance artists that are going to, pull back the curtain at one point and say, "Aha, we got you all." They're media hounds. They were all too eager to be interviewed, and we had thought about interviewing them, and then we just happened to find out they were going to be at the 10th anniversary of 9/11. So we thought, what better situation? And it was really. It was probably one of the most difficult interviews I did, in the sense that they're not stupid, these people, and I really had to be on my toes. And I had my wife and my brother-in-law and his partner watching as well, and a whole bunch of other people, including Chris Collingworth from Sunday Night Football. And so it was difficult.
The interesting thing about them, though, is in the process of getting them into the film, it was very easy. I thought it would be one of the most daunting things to do. But one of the guys there, the guy with the beard who's saying you can't go to heaven and live like hell, he became a friend of mine in the process of doing this. I mean, I don't know that we would consider that now, but after they've seen the film. But very, just nice people off the camera. And, with the second day, I think we shot with them. We're approaching them, and he goes, "Hey, Dave, how are you?" And I'm going, "I'm not with you guys." Super nice guys, and probably, they wanted everybody to be laughed. They'd give us interviews as long as we wanted. Like that, they just loved it.
And that's where you kind of walk a fine line, even interviewing these people, because you don't want to draw attention to them, but at the same time, I felt they really epitomized the end of the line when it comes to certainty, that this is where it ends. And so let's look at it, and let's all, at the beginning of the film, you all can feel pretty comfortable, I think, looking at them, but deeper into the film, hopefully start to listen to them and other people that maybe don't look like them, but actually start to sound like them.
On to marketing. When does the film play next, and where else is it playing?
I think at like 10:05. So it's playing all this week here, Vancouver, Langley. Next weekend we're opening in the Prairie Provinces, Calgary, Edmonton, Saskatoon, Regina, Winnipeg, and then moving out east on the 26th, Toronto, Oakville. I think we're going to be in Ottawa, Montreal as well. So, and we're continuing to move across the states as well at the same time.
And if you don't know, hellboundthemovie.com,
Yeah.
all that screening info is there.
Yeah.
All the showtimes, yeah. Yes.
There were so few women. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, that's something I wrestle.
Few women.
Few women, yeah. Actually, there's more women in the film than you think there are. Seriously, watch it again. You'll see women everywhere. But in terms of the theologians interviewed, I mean, it really reflects the nature of the debate. If you look at when Rob Bell comes up with his book, it was a white male writes a book about hell. Who's the majority of the people who responded? White males. I think every every major figure who responded, apart from Francis Chan, was in that category. And so I think, Sharon Baker, yeah, but she kind of was ahead of the curve. But I think that, in a sense, what it reflects is a bit of this is, in a sense, a privileged debate. I think that there's some of the most privileged people on the planet, which are white males, who tend to benefit from so many things in society, are the ones who seem to be the most preoccupied with hell, me being one of them. And I think that's an interesting subtext.
We really just wanted to follow the story as honestly as we could, and these are the people that we came to. To be honest, there's a lot of other people that were in the film that are on the cutting room floor that deserve to be in the film, but this is just going to be it.
I'm going to go back there and then come down here.
I was just wondering if there was anyone that you wanted to interview who declined, or there was anyone who you sort of had difficulty with and you couldn't show for whatever reason.
Yeah, like Dave said, there's at least a dozen people that we interviewed that we didn't end up putting in the film that we probably will show up on a DVD. There's several people, several very prominent voices that we approached but who declined to be interviewed.
You care to say who and why?
I can only speculate as to why, but yeah, people like John Piper, who we showed some footage of, Tim Keller, who's a very famous guy. Yeah, Francis Chan's another one.
Rob Bell in person.
Rob Bell, yeah. Albert Moeller. Yeah, there's a lot of people. N.T. Wright.
Garnet?
Yeah. So you opened and closed with 9/11. What was the big challenges of sort of your story structure, of everything in between? What was the greatest challenge? Did Robert McKee give you some tips?
He gave us tips about everything.
He helped me to like True Grit.
What's that?
He helped me to like True Grit.
Okay. He helped Dave like True Grit. Some of the most difficult, the challenging part structurally in the film is to give history and theology without boring an audience, and trying to make that accessible to a broad audience. That's tricky. And I know people are saying the film is dense and heady and that sort of thing, and to me, I feel boy, you're lucky it wasn't what I wanted it to be. So, yeah.
Here?
I have a question for you, Kevin. Being a screenwriter yourself and having the opportunity to sit down with Robert McKee, I guess coming from a perspective of telling a story, and using that as a narrative of how we view hell, how did that help kind of form or deform, or kind of to take you on the quest of making this movie? What McKee had to say about having consequences, being part of the human narrative and absolutely essential for any kind of social order, and if we take it that faith or religion, providing a context of social order.
Well, I think, we didn't interview him first, so everything's out of sequence, right? But, I mean, as I went back and started to look at the footage, I realized that the gauntlet that he throws down in that interview is one that we need to respond to. And if you watch the film again, you'll notice that we're, in a sense, the whole film is made in response to his statement, is that he's really trying to lay out the cold logic of hell. And so the question is he right? Is there another way to look at this, and how have people dealt with that topic? So yeah, he really ends up becoming, unwittingly, for me, the person that I'm trying to answer. An interesting thing about Robert McKee is that he was a difficult guy to get, because he's the crusty old guy who puts you through the gears type thing. And but he, after spending some time talking with him, he agreed to do the interview, and I found out he's totally fascinated by this topic, and in fact he's in the midst of writing a book on evil right now. But he said to me, Kevin, he goes, I'm going to say yes to this film because I know this is a personal journey. And he goes, you seem like a smart guy, and so I think I know where that journey ends. So, I don't know, the jury's still out on that one. Oh, okay, yeah. One thing I would say structurally in the film, I would break it down into 3 parts. Act 1 I would call certainty, Act 2 I would call ambiguity, and Act 3 I would call humility. And that's sort of a kind of a little bit of a subtextual progression that we're trying to move through in the film. That's again why we start with the Westboro Baptist.
Way at the back.
You were talking about personal journey, and I'm just curious as to have your personal beliefs developed or changed much through the making of this film?
Yeah, I started the film. Well, to be honest, I was a hopeful universalist, and so I was very open to that idea and hoping that there could be some way of making that work within Orthodox Christianity. And I came away from the film convinced, definitely, that it could be. But I would say that so many of my beliefs, you can't make a film like this. I've been on this for almost 2 years. I mean, a lot longer if you count the time working on Brad's, not just one book, but many books. And yeah, you can't help but just deconstruct pretty much everything you believe. And so that's definitely an ongoing process. But for me, it's been a really liberating process, which has turned me, oddly enough, into an evangelist. Something I haven't really been since I was like 20.
One there, and then, yeah, go ahead. Yes.
Interesting that you said evangelist, because I was going to say that, and by the way, this has been fascinating tonight, and our Bible study, I wish they were all here, because we've had this conversation. They'll be here this week if I have my way with it. But we've had this conversation over and over and over this year, trying to wrestle with, is there a hell? How can there be a hell? What form of hell? And but we always end with, well, okay, if there is no hell, or if everyone will be saved, then what's the point of evangelism? Is there a place for it? Are we required to share our faith?
Yeah, go for it.
So, I overheard no, I didn't overhear. A guy told me, a pastor in a coffee shop told me, if there were no hell, I would, I wouldn't even be a Christian. And I'm like, then you should quit. Because it's for 2 main reasons. One is, being a Christian is about following Jesus. And he's the best thing he's the kindest person I've ever met. He's the I mean, from my point of view, he's the best thing going. And I don't need to be scared to Jesus. I am loved to Jesus. But secondly, evangelism then is about inviting people out of the hell they're already in. So I've been to hell. It's just west of Thailand. I've been to hell. It's down on the corner of, Hastings and whatever. And people are desperately suffering, and they're in real bondage to addictions and brokenness, abuse, dysfunction, and oppression. And we're saying there's a Jesus way where you could be rescued from this. So I feel like I've become way freer and even more aggressive in my evangelism since I was allowed to do what all the evangelists in the book of Acts did, never mention hell.
Yeah.
Not once.
I have to interject one more time.
Yeah, go for it. I'm done. Yeah.
Because it reminds me of, I have a little quotation where I say my prayers from Rabiana, the Sufi Muslim poetess. And she begins the poem with, Lord, if I love you for the fear of hell, let me burn in hell. Lord, if I love you only for the hope of heaven, let me be deprived of heaven. But Lord, if I love you for yourself, let me not be deprived of your glory.
That's what I meant.
Yes, at the back, yes.
Oh, that was my question.
Okay, cool. And yes?
I wanted to say thank you because I think that it's a perfect story for this debate and for this conversation. And as a woman, I don't have time to spend all the scholarly hours that are involved in this, but thank you for giving me a taste and making me hungry again to find out. Because hundreds of years of us doing the same stuff has just resulted in the same stuff.
Yeah.
And there's something in us that's burning and yearning, and we're finding each other and going, what do you think about this? Whispers, and it's getting louder. And I can't thank you enough for an intelligent movie that I can bring my not yet Christian friends to. Something that I don't have to go, oh my God, I can't believe they just put that on YouTube. Thank you very much.
Yes.
I have to say that probably for the first third, I was wondering what the film would look like to people who have no real background in Christianity, and to see that really fervent fundamentalism. I was worried about any potential misunderstanding, backlash. Do you want to speak to that? I mean, there's an ethical dilemma in there in putting that out into the public eye.
Well, I don't think we're showing anybody anything new in the beginning of the film. I think it's out there, and it's there to try and show that there is quite a loud contingent within Christianity. This is Christianity for a lot of people, and that they are absolutely certain that they've got it. And so I think that this is the caricature that people reject, and so that what we're trying to do in the film is to nuance what Christianity actually is, and that's not all there is to it, even though these people tend to always be the ones grabbing the mic. So I understand the danger you're talking about, but I have a greater faith in deconstruction than of that view.
Yeah.
So.
Here and then here.
Thank you. That must have taken an enormous amount of editing. Just seeing all these people, and I didn't recognize some or some places, and I thought, I bet that part ended up with, who, like the Episcopalian church. I thought, where is this church? This does look Anglican or Episcopalian, but I didn't see where it was. Okay. But it was in the end. And they were the ones who shut the door, and I thought, ooh, does that mean they don't want, what's the meaning? Again, perhaps because this is not, a lot of that is not my world or my background. It was fascinating, very fascinating, but what really hit me, and perhaps for you too, was how people personalize God, not Jesus, but God. It really struck me there to hear them all talk as though God was their dad. And there was this huge importance on being right, and not necessarily being good or doing good, but being right. And it was very striking among certain groups of whom you interviewed. And I was left thinking, wondering, is this small kind of Protestant evangelical, as you say, white privileged world, mainly North American, where are other large faith groups with this? I thought of the Catholics, who've rejected purgatory within the last 20 years.
Yeah.
Where, and then I thought, well, that's a whole other, that's films and films and films, I mean, but I'm curious with you, does this make you want to explore other faith groups who I'm sure are debating this as well, or other faith topics, or is that hell is it and you're gonna go somewhere else now?
No, definitely. I'd like to explore a number of other topics. And I mean, we did actually start out this film trying to do a comparative study in different religions and how they view this, because my suspicion is if something crops up in a whole bunch of religions, it doesn't sound like revelation, it actually sounds like psychological projection or sociology. But then, you know, there's a really good History Channel documentary that already does that. And so why remake it? And I think what happened was midway through our development, this whole controversy flared up over Rob Bell. I didn't even really know who Rob Bell was when I started on this film, because I wasn't really cognizant of that at all. But once that happened, it opened me up to a whole world that was happening, so we set out to try and use that flashpoint as the launching point for the film.
Excellent, thank you so much.
I've got 3 questions. Any more after that? Okay, we'll do these 3 and see where that takes us. David.
This might be a question between the editor, music arranger, and Kevin. You know, with documentary filmmaking, I guess sometimes the hope is the role of the director to be somewhat neutral in presenting.
I think it's a naive hope, but yeah.
Yes, so it's always from a matter of perspective, whatever, yeah. But when it came to your creative choice of presenting Mark Driscoll, how did you approach that? He seemed to be easy ammo.
Yeah, Mark, easy ammo in terms of...
I could just see so much, there was so much...
You give me lots to work with?
Yes.
Yeah, no, Mark is a never-ending, source of gross oversimplifications. Yeah.
And so I noticed like musical cues that would come in and certain edits that would happen. What were you conscious of shedding him in a certain...
Well, I think with him, I think the way we approached him was just to give him ample room to make his views, just to give him the best platform in which to do that. Same way I treated Brad.
I spend more time with their lawyers.
I like to have
anybody.
that animation across country. That was nice.
Oh yeah. Oh, you notice the subtext, by the way, of Mark Driscoll's Borders thing is that the worst thing you can possibly be is not an American.
Yes.
Sure. As a teacher, asking a fairly open question, but to what degree, because I can see that obviously that's one of the themes and intents of the film is to open that dialogue, and hence the panel as well. But to what degree, after interviewing all these people, did you get a sense that there is hope in that dialogue? Your sense of hope for the dialogue?
You know, the person who made me the most hopeful was actually Mike Bickle from the International House of Prayer. Just because we had an interaction afterwards, he came up to me, we hung around, shot some B-roll and stuff, and we were actually really worried about going there because our director of photography's parents have worked there for the last 3 years, and he hadn't gone to visit them for 3 years because of that. And so we're listening to NPR stories about them on the way there, and quite concerned. And afterwards, Mike came up to me, and he punched me in the chest, and he goes, "Man, that was fun." And he goes, "That was just, man, you just really made me think. I haven't thought about this stuff for so long. I'm going to go back and study this stuff. This is really interesting." You know, and he was, to me, just as a person, I don't know what you've read about him or heard about him, but he was very gracious, and that gives me hope, because his heart, who cares what he believes? His heart seemed to be in the right place.
The other aspect of hope now is that I think the monopoly's gone, and even the movie itself will be a game changer there, where now it really is a discussion, and it's even an in-house discussion, and it's not like if you have to believe this or you're excluded. I think you killed it, and so to me that's a major turning point in Western Christian history, maybe. Well, we'll see. But really, 20 years ago, for Protestants, or evangelical, you had to believe in eternal conscious torment, or you were not a Christian. And so we're at a pretty pivotal time, I think, where now it's an actual talk.
One here and then two at the back. Yes.
I didn't know until tonight that asking questions was an act of cowardice, so I'm a little bit.
As long as you don't cause us to ask questions.
I guess it felt at times a little bit like Calvinists up against the world. And I guess I'm curious, like, how would you respond to someone who doesn't come from a Calvinist point of view, who might say, I don't feel like this is fair to me. I believe in eternal torment, but not for the reasons that will be laid out here, or, do you kind of feel like that's the logical other side, is to have some of that?
Well, yeah, I think we do address that position when we talk about C.S. Lewis, and we talk about free will and that sort of thing, which would represent the other tradition, which is you don't get sent to hell, you choose to go there. I think that we definitely we spend more time responding to the Calvinist view of election than we do the Arminian side, but I think we do address that position.
I'm just wondering, would you say that in this season, whether it's at the start of the millennium or even in the last 5 or 6 years, in your view, is the church, as we would, I guess, generally define it, going through a paradigm shift to such a degree that we would say church history is changing?
Why don't we ask a church historian, Ron?
I think two things are probably happening. One is people are asking these questions who've grown up in a conservative evangelical and evangelical reformed. They're certainly going through a shift, and who knows the consequences of that. There's two directions people can go from asking those questions. They can continue to fragment the church because they don't believe in various forms of Protestantism, and so you have all these little emergent congregations which really just continue the Protestant fragmentation. But a lot of these people who are asking these questions are finding great nourishment from the classical tradition, because there's immense wealth of reflection. These are not new questions. There's nothing new under the sun. And some of the great Ammas and Abbas of the church have thought about these things. When Jeff was asking about Origen, Origen was the first great, actually he brought together all the manuscripts and he's reflected on these verses. He looked at the annihilationist positions, he looked at eternal torment, he looked at universalists. And he came to see that probably implicit in the text, and even explicitly, is the Christian tradition has strong universalist tendencies. And then Athanasius comes along and says, well, why did God become human? So that humans could be divinized. So we have a whole atonement theory of deification. And then Gregory of Nyssa fleshes this out even further in his work. So I think what you're getting a shift. One is asking hard theological questions and moving away what some people took in with their mother's milk almost, and they're saying it hasn't nourished me. And so they're fragmenting, but the answers to their questions, the mothers and fathers of the church have thought through that. And I think it's in dialogue with some of these good critical questions that are coming up with the ancient future, connecting the Robert Weber talks about. But we're definitely going through a shift. There's no doubt, and it's a very healthy shift. Where it will be in 20, 30 years will depend on what people do with that shift in their own life.
Well, that was the question I was arriving at as you were answering, is there's, I agree that I think that there's a paradigm shift in thought, but also in behavior. So that's exactly to that point. It'll be interesting to see how that comes up.
I want to suggest, though, that a lot of these visions of hell that are had in the West were a result of the Black Plague and the invasion of the Huns and other barbarians. That it wasn't at all universal in the West. The atonement, this atonement theory, and this concrete vision of hell weren't really universal in the West either until after the Black Plague and the Great Barbarian Invasions. And that sort of reshaped people's mentality and emotions in a way, that they saw things in that kind of a light. Because it was never, ever believed in the ancient church. So it had to have come from someplace. And more or less it came from those terrors that brought in what are called the Dark Ages. They weren't all that dark. But that medieval period of the Black Plague, really responsible for a lot of people's vision and understanding of hell.
I think we have one last question there, yes.
Just piqued my interest, I think somebody brought it up, about some interviews that have been left out. Now, you said that you had interviewed Tim Keller and Francis Chan, was that?
No, we did interview
Okay.
them, they refused, yeah.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for coming. You can interact on hellboundthemovie.com. There's room for comments there.
Sure.
And Facebook, there's presence on Facebook as well. And share it all with your friends and thank our panelists.